Welcome to this talk on Swabian and edda, negation at the interfaces. My name is Tina and I'm co-authoring this talk with Lea Raach, who is now a master's student at the University of Constance. I will first give a brief introduction to negation and I will then show how negation is distributed in a German clause and how this distribution can be syntactically implemented. In the last part, I will show how the prosodic aspect of negation can be used to guide a forthcoming interpretation in terms of semantics and pragmatics. Swabian is a southern German dialect, and in this talk I will focus on the Swabian negation markers ed and edda, which can be translated by Standard German nicht, although Standard German does not distinguish between the two forms. German nicht, a former negative particle, replaced in the past the Old High German sentential negation marker, the preverbal clitic ne. Its distribution is basically the same as ed and edda taken together. Swabian negation shows regional variation. You also find ned and nedda, and it and ide. And the phenomenon seems to extend to other dialects as well, for example Austrian, nid and nö. I am not aware of any research so far that discusses this distinction. Our data comes from the Zwirner corpus, which is a collection of interviews with dialect speakers from the 60s. The Swabian part consists of 23 unannotated interviews, around 7 hours and 50 minutes. Now, to show you an example from Swabian, listen to the following. Again. I'm sure all the non-Swabian speakers perfectly well understood the sentence. If not, here's a translation. Der ist nicht Soldat gewesen, der ist bei der Bahn gewesen. He wasn't a soldier, he was with the railway company. Now, before we discuss the negation in more detail, we have to discuss negation in general. Negation has a similar effect as the focus particles, but it reverses the truth values of a clause. In its unmarked form, it scopes over the clause, but the scope of negation can also be indicated by prosodic prominence. If we look at negation in the context of discourse, we know that discourse participants share a common ground. They have a set of propositions which they assume to be true. And if you want to update the common ground, you have to make an assertion, with the goal to reduce the context set, that is, to reduce the possible worlds to the actual world. Stalnaker himself says, to make an assertion is to reduce the context set in a particular way, provided that there are no objections from the other participants in the conversation. This effect is avoided only if the assertion is rejected. So negation can actually be viewed as a rejected assertion. But there's more. Negations open up questions under discussion. This term was coined by Roberts in 1996. You can also use topic under discussion. And a question under discussion is a set of possible worlds which the discourse participants are mutually committed to resolve at some point. So it's an open question. This can be explicit, but it can also be implicit, as in to. And the QUDs are also sensitive to focus. So we have Bill likes Mary, an assertion, but the assertion is rejected, no. And then we have he likes Jane. So the discussant actually indicates via focus which part of the assertion is rejected and offers a new proposition. Now, negation indicates a QUD and thus a set of alternative worlds. It is a focus-sensitive operator. It is interacting with prosodic prominence to constrain the alternatives that the speaker is entertaining. Thus, prosodic prominence actually constrains the QUD, which is raised by the negation itself. So how do we detect the scope of negation? In this context, the two German contrastive connectors aber and sondern play a role. With aber, the contradicted clause can either be positive or negative, and you can translate it with however. With sondern, the contradicted clause has to be negative. It has to contain, for example, nicht. It is used when two concepts exclude each other. It can be translated as but, rather, or instead. So in order to detect the scope of negation, sondern is usually used. Before we come to the linear distribution of negation in a German sentence, I would briefly like to introduce the model of German topological fields. German linguists traditionally divide the sentence into fields. We have a forefield where you usually find the subject and the topicalized objects. We have a left sentence bracket where the finite verb is placed. We have a middle field where you find, depending on the clause structure, subjects, objects, adjuncts. Then there's the right sentence bracket, the non-finite verbal complex with the participles and the infinitives. And then you also have a Nachfeld. In order to make this more simple, I would like to reduce this to the Vorfeld as everything before the finite verb, the Nachfeld everything after the non-finite verbal complex, the Mittelfeld as everything between the finite verb and the non-finite verbal complex, the left bracket as the finite verb, and the right bracket as the non-finite verbal complex. Now this division is highly useful when describing negation. So, negation in German is fairly free in its distribution. In the following sentence, all possible positions for it are marked. And I'm using, apart from the negation markers, I'm using standard German just to make it more simple. So, the following positions are possible. We have Amra hat dem Lehrer die Aufgaben gegeben. We have Amra hat dem Lehrer die Aufgaben gegeben. We have Amra hat dem Lehrer die Aufgaben gegeben. We have Amra hat dem Lehrer die Aufgaben gegeben. All of these are perfectly possible choices. Now, if we have in the Mittelfeld, we find that negation scopes over whatever follows, with a slight preference for the immediate right sister. If there are several potential candidates, all of these can be in the scope of the negation, individually. Yeah? So to check whether constituent is in the scope of negation, we can use sondern. For the previous sentence, for example, we have Amra hat X die Aufgaben gegeben. We can replace dem Lehrer with der Schulleiterin, for example. We have Amra hat dem Lehrer X gegeben. We can replace die Aufgaben with die Antworten. And dem Lehrer die Aufgaben X. We can replace gegeben with gereicht, although the sentential interpretation is preferred then, where you simply say something like, oh, she didn't give the exercises to the teacher, but she went home. Similar patterns are found if precedes the Aufgaben, so as you can see, there are quite a lot of potential candidates for the QUD if negation is prosodically unmarked. Now the following is a tentative analysis in terms of questions under discussions. This needs to be refined and any comments on this are very welcome. So the question under discussion, the QUD with M is a set of propositions where M is the move that is made to alter the common ground. In our context, this is the negation. Now, if we have an X, which is dem Lehrer die Aufgaben geben, to give the teacher the exercises, and we have a Y, which is a subset of X, so this is, for example, only one of the constituents. If we then negate X, this opens up a new question under discussion, where X cannot be part of the set of this question under discussion, and Y can be part of the alternatives. Now, if we have prosodic prominence, this can be used to reduce the possible alternatives. If is prominent, then the replacement of the complete Mittelfeld is the most likely alternative. If there's prosodic prominence on a particular constituent in the Mittelfeld, it is only this constituent that needs to be replaced for the proposition to become true. So then, if we have a sentence like Amra hat Amra hat Ed dem Lehrer die Aufgaben gegeben. Then the Aufgaben would be prominent and X would only equal die Aufgaben. And X again cannot be part of the set of prepositions from the question under discussion. So now that we talked about Ed in the Mittelfeld, what about edda? Edda only occurs at the end of the clause in sentences where the right bracket of the Mittelfeld is unoccupied. So we find it in Ravi schläft Edda, Ravi sleeps not, Ravi doesn't sleep, Ravi füttert den Goldfisch Edda, Ravi feeds the goldfish not, Ravi doesn't feed the goldfish. Edda seems to be in a closer relationship with the verb. If I want constituent negation in that context, it cannot be enforced via prosodic prominence. So I cannot have in situ prominence in the sense that I cannot say something like Ravi füttert den Goldfisch Edda. If I want to put prosodic prominence on the goldfish, I will have to put the goldfish into the Vorfeld. So I'll topicalize it. I can't say den Goldfisch füttert Ravi Edda. But then I cannot answer with a sondern clause, but I have to use an aber clause. I can say, aber die Katze füttert er. So there's an ellipsis there. So this is not constituent negation. I can also replace edda with Ed. I can say, Ravi füttert Ed den Goldfisch, sondern die Katze. And here I then have constituent negation. This restriction of edda to sentential negation possibly indicates that edda is the right sentence bracket, so it actually occupies that position. In the Vorfeld, negation can also occur with Ed. In that case, however, the negated constituent has to be prosodically prominent, and negation itself cannot be prosodically prominent. So I can have Ed Amra hat dem Lehrer die Aufgaben gegeben, but I cannot say Ed Amra hat dem Lehrer die Aufgaben gegeben. Negation in this position can only indicate constituent negation, not sentential negation, and this fits in with the previous data. Now for syntactic implementation, the Mittelfeld has a fairly free word order. This can be modeled via a meta category and a shuffle operator. For the clause itself, we have three meta categories: Vorfeld, Mittelfeld, Nachfeld, and we have the left bracket, the finite verb, and we have the right bracket, the non-finite verbal complex. Now within the meta category, we can insert different XPs or adverbs and give them free word order by using this shuffle operator here. So for Ed, we can just include Ed into the meta category where it can shuffle freely. For edda, however, we can optionally replace the verbal complex, the right bracket, in the main S rule. Now for the representation, Adam and Agnieszka proposed two negation attributes, inek and sinek. However, such a fine-grained distinction is not necessary here. Constituent negation is really signaled via prosodic prominence, and we can regulate the scoping via F precedence and the right sister in the unmarked case. Therefore, I will adopt the adjunct annotation that is used by the majority of the parkrun grammars. Now, in order to capture the prosodic facts, I will use the model proposed in my own thesis. This model assumes the exchange of information based on two transfer processes. First, the transfer of vocabulary, which exchanges phonological and morphosyntactic information of lexical elements via the multidimensional lexicon. And then the transfer of structure, which exchanges information on syntactic and prosodic phrasing and on intonation. And this is the more relevant transfer process for our needs. Now, during comprehension, information from the speech signal feeds into P structure. P structure itself is modeled by the P diagram, which is a linear syllable-wise representation of the speech signal over time. The raw acoustic information coming from the speech signal is stored at the signal level of P structure. Take, for example, the following clause, where prosodic prominence can be found on ed. Is ed nach Haus gegangen. Nein, is ed nach Haus gefahren. This will result in the following P diagram, where each syllable, is ed nach Haus gefahren, is represented by a vector, and the vector associates this syllable with the associated values in the signal itself. So this syllable has a mean fundamental frequency of 195, and this is its duration. Now, the raw signal information encodes patterns that can be interpreted in categorical terms at the interpretation level. For example, the fundamental frequency here has a strong rise on the negation ed, followed by a continuing fall. You can see it here. Here we have a strong rise on the negation and a continuing fall in the fundamental frequency. Now, such a rise can be interpreted in categorical terms by an H-tone, an H-star pitch accent, according to the German Toby system. I also apply an independent prominence level, which is proposed by the new DEMA annotation set. This prominence indicates whether this is a strong accent or not, and in that case, this is a very prominent level. So during the transfer of structure, the information encoded in the P structure becomes available for further interpretation. The following annotation checks whether ed carries prosodic prominence in P structure. If this is the case, an attribute prom plus is included in the F structure of the negation particle. So here we have the annotation. This basically says that take all the terminal nodes of the current node, and for any syllable in the vicinity, if the G-Toby attribute has an H-star value, and similarly, if the attribute prominence has prominence level 3, then add a prominence equals plus feature to the F structure. The constraints with regard to prominence on constituents can be implemented as a meta-category, which routinely checks every terminal node and allows for a quick recognition of prosodic prominence. Consider, for example, the following example, where the prominence is on Haus. So is et nach Haus gefahren, but to his girlfriend. So Haus here is in the negation scope. And if we now apply the constraints we just had to Haus, we end up with the following F structure annotation. So we have Haus, and we have the prominent attribute value here, and we also have the negation marker here. This approach crucially leaves the ultimate interpretation of the interaction of negation and prosodic prominence to semantics and pragmatics. So the negation marker does not syntactically integrate into the negated constituent, and that only makes sense because, as we have seen, prosodic prominence on a constituent doesn't necessarily mean that this prominent constituent is the right sister of the negation marker. So together with constraints like F precedence, the above F structure can be interpreted in terms of negation scope and consequently in terms of possible worlds for the QUD. So, to conclude, edda is confined to the right bracket and only indicates sentential scope. Ed has a fairly free distribution and can, in interaction with prosodic prominence, indicate sentential or constituent scope. Prosodic prominence can be captured via the syntax prosody interface. And a meta-category can be assigned to every terminal node, and this meta-category then checks for prosodic prominence in the associated p-structure representation. The prominence feature is assigned independently of negation, and the overall interpretation of the different features in terms of meaning is left to semantics and pragmatics. So thank you very much, and questions and comments are most welcome.